Back in the 1980s, Australian trucking was the last frontier. The outback stretched forever, the roads tore rigs apart, and the blokes behind the wheel weren't just drivers. They were bush engineers, survivors, and a bit of everything in between. Out there, you didn't worry about compliance or clipboards. You just got the freight there and prayed the gearbox didn't fall out on the way. These were things every truckie did back then that were as normal as breathing, but would have you fined, fired, or front page news today. First up, driving through exhaustion. You didn't stop because a book told you to. You stopped when your eyes couldn't stay open or your hands shook on the wheel. Some blokes drove from Adelaide to Darwin in one push, fueled by coffee, smokes, and pure bloody mindedness. You'd see drivers slap themselves awake, crank up Cold Chisel on the radio, and keep rolling through sunrise. Today, that'd get you suspended before you reach Port Augusta. Back then, it was just called making good time. Then came overloading like it was sport. Freight companies paid by the ton, and every driver knew how to make a load look lighter than it was. Trailers groaned, tires bulged, and the springs looked ready to snap, but the load still moved. If you made it through the weighbridge without setting off alarms, you were a genius. If not, you slipped the inspector a grin and a story about just helping out the farmer. Most of the time, it worked. Having a beer on the road was as Aussie as meat pies and bad AM radio. You'd pull over at a roadhouse, grab a stubby from the fridge, and have a yarn with whoever was parked up. It wasn't about getting drunk, it was about the ritual, a bit of normal in a life that was anything but. No one thought twice, it was part of the job. Try that now, and you'd lose your license before you finished the first sip. One that'll make safety officers sweat just hearing it. Fixing rigs while still moving. Old Whites, Macs, and Fodens weren't polite machines. Something was always rattling loose, so you leaned out the window at 90 k's an hour, spanner in hand, tightening whatever was about to fall off. Some blokes would even climb out onto the side step, check a strap, and jump back in without missing a beat. Mad? Maybe. But when you're 2 days from help, you learn to improvise. Then there was smoking while refueling. The smell of diesel and tobacco was the scent of the job. You'd see drivers leaning on the pump, ciggy between their lips, chatting away while hundreds of liters poured in. Everyone knew it was stupid, but no one stopped. Maybe it was luck, maybe it was skill, but the servos never went up. These days, you'd have alarms blaring before you even pulled out the lighter. Taking passengers was another rule breaker that felt completely normal. Long drives meant long silences, so blokes filled the cab with whoever wanted a lift. Mates, girlfriends, hitchhikers, dogs, even kids during school holidays. You'd see toddlers standing on the seat, watching the road stretch forever. Dangerous? Probably. But back then, it was just life on the road. It made the miles shorter and the memories better. Then came bush repairs that looked like witchcraft. Nothing stayed in one piece for long out there. You didn't wait for a mechanic, you became one. If a hose burst, you wrapped it with duct tape and fence wire. If the radiator leaked, you fed it soap or oats. Some drivers swore by mixing pepper into the coolant. Look, stops leaks, keeps her running. It was ridiculous, but it worked. You could tell a real truckie by how many improvised fixes they'd done before breakfast. And maybe the most Aussie of them all, like sleeping anywhere you could stop. No rest stops, no roadhouse bunk beds, just gravel shoulders and open skies. You'd park up, pull a blanket over your legs, and call it a night. Sometimes the frost formed on the inside of the windscreen. Sometimes the mozzies ate you alive, but you didn't care. That cab, no matter how small or cold, was home. It was a wild, unpredictable time, but no one complained. These weren't outlaws, they were the backbone of the country. The men who moved the freight fed the cities and braved roads that could kill a truck as easily as a kangaroo. Every illegal habit was born from one truth: the outback didn't wait for permission, and neither did the men who conquered it. By the time you got past the halfway mark of a long haul in the 1980s, the rules were just a rumor. Out there, it was survival, not safety manuals. Every truckie had their own way of getting through, a mix of instinct, stubbornness, and bush know-how that would make a modern compliance officer break into a cold sweat. These were the rest of the habits that kept the country rolling, even if they'd get you banned in a heartbeat today. One of the biggest was hand signaling on the highway. Before radios became common, truckies talked with gestures at 100 clicks an hour. But leaning out the window into a 110-degree wind with road trains passing in the opposite direction was madness. More than one bloke caught a bird to the knuckles, but no one complained. It was communication the old-fashioned way. Fast, risky, and human. Then came running without proper rego or permits. Paperwork always lagged behind the reality of the job. If the boss said the freight had to move, you went, even if the plates were borrowed off another truck or still sitting on a desk in Perth. Most coppers knew the deal. You'd flash a grin, show a half-filled folder, and pray they were in a good mood. Half the time they waved you on, half the time they just laughed and said, "Typical truckies." Try that now and you'd be grounded before you could start the engine. Carrying dodgy loads was another. In those days, you didn't need a special license for dangerous goods. You just needed guts. Fuel drums, chemicals, even a few crates marked explosive got tossed on the trailer with a shrug. No high-vis vests, no hazard placards, and definitely no safety briefings. The only rule was, don't hit a bump too hard. And somehow, they managed to haul half the mining industry across the desert without blowing themselves up. Next up, chain towing a mate through the bush. When a rig broke down, you didn't call for help. You made your own. A length of steel chain, 2 steady hands, and a bit of blind faith were all you needed. The lead driver couldn't see a thing in the dust cloud, and the bloke behind had no brakes left worth mentioning. If either one blinked, they'd both end up in a ditch. But when they rolled into the next roadhouse together, covered in dirt and grinning, it was pure mateship on display. Then there was the ghost run shortcut. Some truckies hated detours or waiting for clearance, so they took closed roads and forgotten dirt tracks that barely existed. You'd follow fence lines, creek beds, and half-collapsed bridges guided by memory and luck. It saved hours, or cost you a week if you got stuck, but for the drivers who made it, it was worth it. There was pride in beating the system, in knowing the land better than the map did. Skipping maintenance was almost expected. The trucks ran day and night, and if something broke, you patched it and kept going. Tires with cords showing, brakes that squealed like parrots. Good enough was the standard. If you pulled over every time something went wrong, you'd never deliver a load. It wasn't laziness, it was necessity. The Outback didn't wait for spare parts. You made do, and if the truck rattled, that just meant it was alive. And finally, hauling past curfews and weight limits like they didn't exist. Some towns had night bans or bridge restrictions, but if a load had to move, it moved. Drivers timed it between patrol shifts, engines idling in the dark until the road was clear. A few ran through with lights off for the first stretch, heart thumping, wheels thundering over the tarmac. It was risky, but it got the job done. And out there, that was all that mattered. The truth was, those truckies weren't outlaws. They were craftsmen of chaos. They knew the dangers. They lived with the risks, and they did it anyway. Because if they didn't, no one else would. They built Australia's supply lines on sweat, smoke, and instinct. Today the roads are smoother, the trucks are cleaner, and the rules are everywhere. But ask any old driver what they remember, and you'll hear the same thing. The freedom, the danger, and the pride of keeping a country alive with nothing but grit and diesel. That was 1980s trucking. When the rules were optional, the roads were wild, and every mile told a story worth remembering.